There was a very specific kind of movie that used to dominate theaters. Not giant superhero spectacles, not billion-dollar franchises, not cinematic universes where you needed homework assignments before buying popcorn. I mean, movies that were just movies. A slick crime comedy starring two recognizable actors, a weird sci-fi thriller with mid-sized budget, and one genuinely insane idea. Adult dramas that weren't trying to become content. Films that could succeed without needing to spawn 6 sequels, a prequel series, and a Funko Pop line. Somewhere along the line, those movies started disappearing. The mid-budget movie used to be the backbone of Hollywood. Not the biggest films, not the smallest, just solid, ambitious, weirdly personal movies made for adults. The kind of films people quoted for years after seeing them on cable at 1 a.m. And now, half the time when a studio releases one, audiences act like they just spotted an endangered animal crossing the highway. Because modern theaters are dominated by two extremes. Either a movie costs $300 million and features at least one glowing sky portal, or it's a tiny indie film made for the price of a used Honda Civic. The middle ground is collapsing. And honestly, we lost a lot more than people realize. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, studios regularly made movies aimed at adults that weren't based on existing intellectual property, which now sounds completely fictional. You could walk into a theater and see something like Michael Clayton, Collateral, or Inside Man. These weren't tiny art films, they had major stars, real budgets, and wide theatrical releases. And they trusted audiences to pay attention for longer than 11 seconds. That was the era where studios still believed adults might willingly watch movies involving dialogue. Crazy concept, I know. And these films occupied this perfect creative space, big enough to look polished and cinematic, but not so expensive that studios panicked if they weren't global mega hits. Directors had room to experiment, writers could pitch original concepts, actors took on roles without the possibility of reprising them a dozen times over the next decade. Mid-budget movies were where filmmakers got weird in interesting ways. That's how you got films like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Imagine pitching that movie today. So it's a romantic drama about memory erasure and emotional trauma. Okay, where's the shared universe? There isn't one. Does the protagonist at least punch a beam of light in the third act? No? Get out. A movie like that somehow got made with actual stars and a respectable budget because studios once believed originality itself had value. And audiences responded to it. Mid-budget movies often became long-term favorites because they felt personal. They weren't engineered entirely through market research spreadsheets. You could feel a director's fingerprints on them. Even action movies had personality. Compare something like The Fugitive or Ronin to a lot of modern streaming thrillers. Older, mid-budget action films had texture. They used real locations, real stunt work, real atmosphere. Modern streaming thrillers sometimes feel like they were generated by an algorithm, trained exclusively on airport televisions. You know the type. Gray color grading, one famous actor looking mildly concerned while holding a gun. You watch it once while folding laundry and immediately forget everything about it. And look, streaming isn't entirely the villain here. Streaming actually saves certain kinds of films from extinction, but it also changed audience expectations in ways that hurt theatrical mid-budget movies badly. Because once viewers became accustomed to watching dramas and thrillers at home, studios started questioning whether adults would still leave the house for them. Meanwhile, giant franchise movies became safer investments internationally. Dialogue-heavy adult dramas don't always travel globally as easily as giant action spectacles. Explosions translate into every language. So studios shifted towards gigantic tentpoles and recognizable brands. Theatrical movies increasingly became events. And if a movie didn't feel massive, audiences were trained to wait for streaming. And that created this brutal cycle. Studios stopped marketing mid-budget films aggressively because they assumed audiences wouldn't show up. Audiences stopped showing up because the films felt less culturally important. Then studios used those weak numbers to justify making fewer of them. Now we're in this bizarre situation where people constantly complain that Hollywood only makes sequels while also ignoring original movies when they do actually release them. Which, to be fair, is partially because studios sometimes market original films with all the enthusiasm of tax policy updates. A genuinely interesting thriller comes out, and the marketing campaign is basically one vague trailer and a bus stop poster. Then 3 months later, everyone online says, "Wait, why didn't anyone tell me about this movie?" This especially hurt comedies. Mid-budget comedies used to completely dominate pop culture. Superbad, Step Brothers, Mean Girls, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. These movies became cultural landmarks. Now, theatrical comedy barely exists outside animated family films. Part of that is because comedy changed online. Memes, TikTok, YouTube clips, and social media deliver constant, rapid-fire humor for free. Studios became hesitant to gamble large theatrical budgets on comedy when audiences already consume endless amounts of it digitally. But there's also something irreplaceable about seeing a comedy with a packed crowd. Great theatrical comedies become communal experiences. Laughs spread throughout the room, jokes land harder collectively. Watching a comedy alone on a streaming platform while checking your phone every 6 minutes just isn't the same experience. The same thing happened with adult thrillers and courtroom dramas. There used to be tons of movies built entirely around tension, dialogue, and star power. The Firm, A Few Good Men, Prisoners. Now those often become limited streaming series instead. And sometimes that works, but other times it feels like a 2-hour movie stretched into 8 episodes because every streaming platform desperately needs content. Not every story needs to be 8 hours. Some stories should simply arrive, emotionally destroy you, and leave. Movies used to understand that. Another huge loss is the disappearance of star-driven original films. Movie stars once helped mid-budget films thrive because audiences would watch actors they loved, regardless of premise. People showed up because it was a Denzel Washington movie, or a Julia Roberts movie, or a Tom Cruise thriller. Today, intellectual property matters more than stars. The brand often matters more than the cast. And honestly, younger audiences may not even experience movie stardom the same way older generations did. Streaming fragmented pop culture. People watch different things now, and shared cinematic experiences are less common. When I was growing up, everybody saw the same movies, at least for the most part, because theatrical releases dominated culture. A successful mid-budget film could become part of the collective conversation for years. Now, entertainment feels more decentralized. One person's favorite streaming thriller is another person's, "Wait, that came out already?" But despite all of this, audiences clearly still want these movies. Every time a strong original film breaks through theatrically, people get excited because it feels refreshing. Look at Everything Everywhere All at Once. That movie succeeded partly because audiences were starving for something genuinely strange and original. Or look at Barbarian, a weird horror movie built around secrecy and word of mouth. People actively begged others not to spoil it. That kind of audience excitement used to happen constantly. But when movies like The Menu or Bullet Train find success, viewers immediately start saying the same thing. Why don't they make movies like this anymore? Which is both encouraging and deeply frustrating because they literally just did. People want mid-budget movies, but modern viewing habits make supporting them harder. Audiences are overwhelmed with entertainment options. Going to theaters became more expensive. Streaming trained viewers to expect instant availability. It certainly doesn't help that modern theatrical culture sometimes unintentionally discourages smaller films. If every major release is marketed like the cinematic event of the century, quieter movies can feel less urgent by comparison. There's also the issue of risk aversion. Mid-budget movies historically allowed experimentation because the financial stakes were lower than giant blockbusters. But modern studio economics became strangely hostile toward moderate success. A $60 million movie earning $120 million worldwide used to be respectable. Now, some studios behave like anything short of global domination counts as failure, which is insane. Not every movie needs to gross enough money to build its own small nation. And ironically, this obsession with gigantic franchises may actually contribute to audience fatigue. People increasingly crave variety. They want different tones, different genres, different stories. That's why older, mid-budget films continue finding younger fans online. People revisit Children of Men or Zodiac and immediately notice how distinct they feel. These movies weren't designed primarily to set up future installments. They were allowed to simply be excellent, standalone films. There's something refreshing about a movie ending without teasing 6 more products. And all this ties right in with the cult classics we love so much, which were heavily built from mid-budget filmmaking. That ecosystem created room for riskier ideas that didn't need immediate mass appeal. Movies like Blade Runner, Fight Club, and Office Space didn't become beloved because they were perfectly optimized by corporate synergy teams. They became beloved because they felt specific and unusual. Mid-budget cinema gave filmmakers room to fail, interestingly. And I would hope that anyone watching would agree that interesting failure is healthier for art than safe mediocrity. Some of the most memorable films ever made were commercially messy, divisive, and difficult to categorize. Studios used to tolerate that uncertainty, more often at least, because the budgets weren't catastrophic. Now, every theatrical release feels pressured to become either prestige awards bait or gigantic franchise machinery. The middle space where weird, adult-oriented movies once thrived keeps shrinking. But I don't think it's completely dead. Recent years actually showed signs audiences still crave these experiences. The success of films like Civil War, Challengers, and The Holdovers proves viewers still respond to original filmmaking with strong creative identities, especially when studios actually market them well. And horror continues carrying the torch for mid-budget creativity better than almost any other genre. Horror remains one of the few spaces where filmmakers can still make weird, director-driven projects at manageable budgets and achieve major cultural impact. That's why horror fans keep eating better than everyone else. Seriously, horror audiences will support a movie called something like The Crooked Man's Basement Ritual, made for $12 in a fog machine, if the concept sounds interesting enough. And because horror remains financially viable, studios allow more experimentation there, which is exactly how cult classics continue emerging. But overall, the disappearance of mid-budget movies represents more than just an industry trend. It changed the texture of movie culture itself. We lost a category of film that connected mainstream accessibility with artistic personality. Movies that weren't tiny indies or gigantic corporate mythology. Films that adults could casually discover, rewatch endlessly on cable, and slowly turn into personal favorites. Movies that felt human-sized. And maybe that's why people feel nostalgic for that era. Not because every older movie was better. Plenty of them were terrible. Absolute garbage. There are forgotten 2003 thrillers currently rotting in DVD bins for very good reasons. But the ecosystem itself encouraged variety. It allowed for surprise. It gave filmmakers room to make movies that didn't fit neatly into franchise templates. And audiences benefited from that variety, whether they realized it or not. Because sometimes you don't need a cinematic universe. Sometimes you just need 2 great actors, 1 weird premise, a solid soundtrack, and 97 minutes of controlled chaos. That used to be enough, and truthfully, it still should be enough. So what's the best mid-budget film you've seen to come out in the last 5 years? Sound off in the comments, and if you feel like leaving a like or subscribing to the channel, that would be fantastic.